Okay. Well, I assume people still trickle in like for the next couple of minutes, but I'll just do a quick introduction, and then by then, sort of by 4:05, Jacquelyn should be able to start. Yeah, kia ora, my name's Emma, not Nico Elson. I'm using his his Zoom at the moment because it's paid, and this means that we get to have a longer call, which is great, not the 40-minute usual. Yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of Women in Urbanism. We've been around for a few years now, and if you have any questions on Women in Urbanism, please don't hesitate to ask about that at the end of the call as well. But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with the kaupapa by now. But yeah, we can cover that later if you'd like. But yeah, just thank you for joining us today. I really hope that all of you are taking care of yourselves at this time, and that you're able to use Women in Urbanism for a bit of a support and comfort during this time. And that's part of the reason why we started up these calls, because we want to make sure we connect. We want to make sure that people still feel inspired and they're learning and connected during this time. We thought this was one way we could do it. Completely understand that it might not work for everyone. I know I just found out that also Zoom calls don't work for people in council staff. So, you know, that's something that we're going to have to rethink about in the future. But for now, I hope this, you know, works today, and then we'll see how we go and where we take it next time. But yeah, this is going to be sort of a semi-short presentation. And yeah, like I said, I'm going to be trying to record it, and it will be followed by small question time and discussion time. If you have a presentation that you'd be keen on presenting in this kind of forum, then please let us know at the end or like after this conversation, because we'd love to like help facilitate that, help you get that set up so you could do that. Can other people hear me? Someone's saying I cannot hear anything. I'm getting nods. Okay, so there's one person. For the person that can't hear me, I think it'd be up in your settings somewhere. My partner showed me how to do this because this keeps happening to me multiple times during the day because of all these meetings. Something always goes wrong. But is there someone that could jump in the chat and help out Galaxy A3 2016 and just help them with setting up their sound while I continue, and then while Jacquelyn continues with her presentation? Ali, are you able to do that? Oh, thanks, Ali. Yeah, I think it's up in the settings somewhere. Really sorry about that. Not that they can hear me. So our first speaker is Jacquelyn Collins. She's a committee member of Women in Urbanism Aotearoa, and she's pretty much the Leslie Knope of Auckland Council. And if you haven't watched Parks and Rec, that's a really good thing that you could do during this time. It's amazing, and it really embodies, I think, what Women in Urbanism is about. She's been researching questions related to girls, play and active transport for the last few years, and now combines this with her day job at Auckland Council in a role that lets her put her theories into practice. So thank you, Jacquelyn, for doing this. And you know, this isn't the first time we've got Jacquelyn to come out and talk about her work. It's really awesome work, and so I hope you all enjoy the presentation too. But yeah, just while Jacquelyn's presenting, just please make sure that you do keep muted till the end. All right. Thanks. I hope Galaxy A3 is okay now. I'm just going to share my screen and then we'll go.
Cool. Hi everybody. I haven't done a presentation like this before. I've done it in person, but I haven't done it online. It's actually quite nice. I can pretend that I'm just talking to myself, which is very relaxing. So Emma's going to be controlling my slides for me, and I will be talking. So thank you for tuning in. I'll try not to ramble. I did take some notes. Also, please excuse any strange thumping noises because I'm downstairs in my house and my children are upstairs and they're running around a lot. Hopefully it won't be too disruptive, and hopefully none of them will burst in asking for something. Yeah, like Emma said, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about my research, and I thought also about my job, because they're quite interrelated. And I thought also, I was thinking about it when I was writing some notes, and one thing which I've realized is that I hope I can kind of show how it's never too late to find something that you're really interested in and turn it into something big. So I started my undergraduate degree when my twins were 14 months old and I was 39. I graduated last year when I was 44. And I'm now doing my master's, and I'm in a role which is completely aligned to my research, which seems very fortunate. But I kind of feel like that shows it's never too late to do these things, because I dropped out of uni when I was straight out of school. It wasn't my thing at all, and I just went and worked, and I didn't really think I would ever do that kind of stuff, but it turns out I quite like the academic life. So yeah, you know, we're really keen with Women in Urbanism to help people build capacity and to find the projects they're really interested in and crack on with them. So hopefully I can be a bit of an example of how that is possible. So if we flick on to the next slide, this is the stuff that I'm going to kind of whiz through reasonably quickly. And if you've seen my dissertation presentation, I'm going to be touching on it a little bit, but not too much, because I didn't want to bore people who have already seen it. So I've been researching issues around girls in play since late 2018. I did some research for one of my uni lecturers, Trisha Austin, up at the University of Auckland at the end of my 2018 academic year. She was doing a piece of research around good neighbourhood design, and she hired me as a research assistant to write a big synthesised literature review about access to play in suburban neighbourhoods. And as you'll find when I start talking about that in a future slide, it became very focused on girls. I don't know whether she intended that to be the case, but that's definitely how it went for me. Then after that, I found my dissertation topic, which I kind of found out of that research I did for Trisha, which was looking at the gender balance of public place space use. Once that was done, it went quite well. I got quite good grades for that, and so then I got invitations to present for Women in Urbanism. I presented at a kind of a parks industry conference called Green Pavlova last year, and I've done quite a few internal presentations within Auckland Council about my research for people like the Parks Services team. So that's been pretty cool. It's made me learn to be a bit more of a confident presenter. And then after that, when I found that there was quite a lot of interest in some of the stuff in my dissertation, I set up the Girls Play Project, which is a website and a Facebook page intended to try and disseminate information about my research, because I think there's often a bit of a gap between really interesting stuff that is getting researched and the stuff that the rest of us actually read on a regular basis. Most of us are not reading research articles. I mean, if we're not enrolled in a university, we can't even access them. So I think it's quite interesting to try and disseminate stuff. So I was thinking, well, that would be quite a useful thing to do. Plus, I wanted to continue the conversation about girls and play, because a lot of people seem quite interested. I've then decided to continue with my studies. So I'm currently doing my master's thesis around girls and skate parks, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. And I've ended up in a job, as I said, which is completely aligned with my research and enables me to actually try my mad experiments out. So if we flick onto the next slide, I will start giving you a wee bit of a rundown on this. So when I did the research for Trisha around access to play, it became pretty obvious that it was actually more a question of independent mobility, so the extent to which children actually got to be out and doing things without adult supervision. It's obviously clear that that's not the same as it was when a lot of us were young. I mean, I was born in 1975, so I was a child of the 80s, and we were literally shoved out the door and told not to come back until dinner time, which was completely mind-boggling to me now as a parent. We would never do that. So it was really interesting to kind of break down all those reasons, and I think there are a lot of rational and some slightly less rational reasons. So the rational reasons obviously are things like there are a lot of more cars on the road, there's a lot more driveways crossing footpaths, which make it less safe to walk around. We don't really have so many strong connections with our neighbours. So, you know, when I was a kid, people lived in the same house forever, and there was usually a parent, usually a mother, at home all day. So there were a lot of eyes on the street, and you knew the people in your neighbourhood. That's just not the world that we live in anymore. So those are probably pretty rational reasons why parents don't let their children roam the streets and play freely. On the slightly less rational, but I think as a parent completely understandable side, is definitely concerns about, will my child be snatched by some horrible person? And I think we as parents know that the odds of that happening are pretty slim, but you don't want your child to be the one who is, you know, the child who was snatched. So I think it's important to not give parents a hard time for still having those concerns. But anyway, one of the big kind of themes that came out from my research, aside from those factors that influence parents and the freedom that they give their children, was that boys seem to get a lot more freedom than girls, both more freedom to roam and also freedom at a much younger age. So that really led to this kind of phenomenon of the term for it is territorialization, where boys are so much more comfortable and familiar in certain spaces that they kind of become their spaces. So if we flick onto the next slide, This is the kind of definition that I've used on my website about territorialisation. So it's just that dominance. And one of the reasons why I'm studying skate parks now is I think skate parks are an absolute classic example of territorialisation. Boys use them, and you very seldom see a girl there, and it's just completely accepted that that's the way it is, to the point where people will very much, like, people will tell me and argue with me and tell me that no, girls use them all the time, but when you actually question them, they'll talk about they've seen one girl use it once, and they'll conflate that into girls using it all the time. But I've done the research, and it really is very male dominated. So as I'll talk about when I talk about my thesis in a little while, that does affect girls' willingness and comfort levels in using those spaces, because they really do feel like they're not welcome, and that's a real problem. So if we flick onto the next slide, this was the research that was published. It's pretty exciting because it was my first and so far only publishing credits. Hopefully the first of many once I get my act together and write some more. Just trying to think if I can put this up. I can share a link for this if people want to read it. It's very long, but it's really interesting. It's also got sections about access to neighbourhoods for people with disabilities, and also for older people. So it was a really cool and really multifaceted piece of research. One other thing, just thinking about this research, which I think came out of it, was that I really started realising that there's massive nostalgia about play within academic circles, and you really see it if you go to anything like Green Pavlova. You will often have these presentations which will be talking about, wouldn't it be great if we could get back to those days where children could roam freely on the streets, and wouldn't that be so fantastic? I get a little frustrated with that kind of dialogue, because that won't actually happen again, I don't think, because of all those social reasons that I spoke about earlier, you know, more cars, more people, moving more often, all that stuff. So I'm quite interested in trying to keep the conversation about what we can achieve to enable kids to play, rather than trying to wish that the world would go back in time 40 years, because that's not going to happen. If we go on to the next slide. Yeah, I have also tried to use that information that I got from that research as a force for good when I could. So I've got really frustrated when people like Mike Hosking will have a big fit at parents about being soft because they won't let their kids walk to school. So I have taken opportunities when I have them. This was on the spin-off a year or two, maybe last year, where I kind of ripped into Mike Hosking, which was really satisfying, because I really don't like Mike Hosking. He's an idiot. So it was great to be able to kind of try and rebut some of his attitudes about just let's find another thing to beat parents up about, and I tried to point out all the reasons why. So I can share the link to this in the group as well afterwards if people want to read it. If you don't like Mike Hosking, you'll probably enjoy it. If you do like him, then maybe not. So if we flick on to the next slide. So my dissertation looked at girls' access to public play spaces, and this was very much looking to investigate whether the trend that's been really well researched overseas of boys dominating play spaces was as prevalent here as it is overseas. A lot of that research internationally has been done in school playgrounds, which was obviously a fundamental difference with my research, because my research was in public playgrounds. I can see why school playgrounds are often used, because they're really controlled environments and you have this captured audience of children and they have to be there. I think also, though, it's interesting because schools are quite gendered places, you know, like boys lose and girls lose, and lining up in boys and girls, and it's getting a little bit better, but uniforms and everything constantly reinforce the gendering of kids at school. And all the school research very much suggests that boys play lots of wide-ranging, running around everywhere games that take up lots of space, and that girls tend to fit in around the edges. So that was what I was trying to look at in my research, is whether that was something that I could really observe in public playgrounds here. So it was a quantitative study. It was really basic. I stood in playgrounds like a weirdo and counted children. That's what I did. This is where it's really good to be old and be a woman, because nobody even looked twice at me. I mean, if I'd been like a 22-year-old guy trying to do this research, I think the police would have been called. But I stood for hours watching people's children and clearly taking notes, clearly with no children with me, and literally never got challenged on it. So it just goes to show it really is true that you are invisible when you're middle-aged, but it's actually quite useful sometimes, because you can blend in and do quite interesting field work with nobody really noticing you. The way that so what I was basically doing was seeing how many boys and how many girls, and I would watch a piece of play equipment for 5 minutes, time it, and count how many boys and how many girls. The big question that usually comes up at this point is, how did I decide whether children were boys or girls? And my dissertation supervisor, Dory Reeves, and I had quite a lot of conversations about this, because I have a child who's frequently misgendered, because he, just today in fact, in an Auckland for Kids article, he was misgendered because he wears pink and he likes dresses, and he's 7 but he still wears dresses and stuff. So the best that I could do, and I kind of just explained this in my dissertation and my methodology, was that I was looking at gender signifiers, so things which you'd commonly associate with a boy or with a girl, and they are really basic and clumsy, like clothing and hairstyles and clothing colours. So it was more, when I've said boy or girl, it was child presenting as boy and child presenting as girl. But I also think most children are dressed in pretty stereotypical ways and do present in fairly gender stereotypical ways. So although I may have got some of them wrong, I think it was probably reasonably accurate. What I also looked to do in my dissertation was to look at why we have this feeling that boys and girls play differently, so how that's developed. And that really turned into a big literature review talking about biological determinism and gender role socialisation. So are boys and girls just fundamentally different? And so do they have fundamentally different play styles from birth, just because they're boys or girls? Or does the way that we raise our children, and not we necessarily as individuals, but like we as a society, does the way that we raise our children perhaps influence the play styles that eventually emerge? Because there are pretty clear gender differences in play styles. So boys are usually into outdoor play, quite active play, quite often competitive. They like a bit of rough and tumble. They quite like risk in their play, and they'll often play in quite large groups, so quite often be sporty play. Girls will often play more inside, more sedentary play, more cooperative play styles, less interest in risky play, more sociable, and in smaller groups. So that's not me necessarily thinking that. That's a big body of research synthesized. That's the kind of the beliefs about children's play. I actually have twins, a boy and a girl. They are completely the opposite to their gender stereotypes. My son is my gentle, imaginative, not rough and tumble. My daughter is a future superhero who climbs everything and plays football all day. So yeah, but she's a tomboy. She's seen as a tomboy because of that, because we are so clear that we think boys are a certain way and girls are a certain way. I certainly feel from reviewing a lot of research that a lot of that is based on gender role socialisation. And I think it's so prevalent that if there is any biological determinism involved, it's virtually impossible to separate that out, because how can we tell when literally from birth studies have shown we handle boys and girls differently and treat them differently. Anyway, I talked about that a lot. So yeah, I did this playground analysis, and that also included skate parks and BMX tracks. I used the North Shore of Auckland as my study site, and I chose specific playgrounds and skate parks and just did lots and lots and lots of visits to them and counted how many people I saw and whether they were boys or girls. So if you flick on to the next slide, I can show you the main findings that I had was that both genders do use public playgrounds, which is great. Depending on the playgrounds, there were varied percentages, often to do with, hang on, I'm just going to turn on my lights because it's getting dark in here. Often to do with what equipment was available. So Takapuna Playground was definitely the most popular playground, and that had about 51% boys and 49% girls. Playgrounds like Onokoto Domain on the North Shore had more like 69% boys and 31% girls, but that also has like a bike track, and that kind of facility tends to attract little boys more than little girls. And Long Bay had about 72% boys and about 28% girls, which I'm not really sure why that's the case there, to be honest, but it also has a little track, I suppose, for cycling around, so that might be why. Other things which came out was that obviously if we look beyond playgrounds, boys massively outnumber girls. So looking at skate parks in that study, 88% of users were boys and 12% were girls, so huge difference. Beyond that, the other stuff that kind of came out of my study was, because I tried to test for things like, was there a gender difference in preferences for higher risk play equipment? Definitely didn't see a gender difference, but it was pretty clear that older children need more risk in their play, and that the biggest source of tension in playgrounds between children isn't boys against girls like it is in school playgrounds, according to studies. It's much more about big kids and little kids, because the playgrounds we build don't really cater enough to big kids, and a lot of big kids are also not very good at being considerate of younger children, but also adults often make this really difficult because they will get their younger children into spaces which the kids are not really old enough to deal with, and they get in the way quite a lot of older children's play, and that causes some frustration. So I think there's definitely something to be said for maybe acknowledging that smaller children and larger children probably need separate play spaces sometimes, that our ambition to have them all playing together is not necessarily working all that well sometimes. If we flick onto the next slide, we can see these are the recommendations that I had from my dissertation, and what's awesome is now in my job I'm able to start looking and putting these into action, which is super cool. So yeah, we need to talk more to girls about what they'd like to do, because clearly what we're providing, i.e. skate parks, is not cutting it. We need to think beyond skate parks in general for older children, because heaps of boys don't want to skate either. We need to support the girls who do want to use those territorialised spaces, which is pretty much the theme of my thesis, my master's thesis. We need to do better at designing interesting play for kids, and we need to make play more risky and also more interesting for older kids. So if we flick onto the next slide, after I'd done that research, it did sound quite interesting that there was quite a lot of people quite interested in it, which was really cool. So I set up this Facebook page and a website, and I thought it would just be really useful to try and kind of drill down into some of the stuff that my research had talked about, and in particular, as I say, trying to present some of these really cool ideas that other researchers have come up with, but that haven't really been out in a general audience. So I tried using infographics as my vehicle for getting ideas across, and they were pretty cool. I mean, this one that I've done here, this "Do Boys and Girls Enjoy Equal Access to Play?" had about 12,000 views in about 3 days. It's quite bizarre to suddenly have all these people looking at something I did. Some really, really interesting conversations. Quite often people were really, quite, as you can understand, people got quite invested in things being how they are, and nobody likes to think that, are you criticising my parenting because I've encouraged my daughter to do this? Obviously that's not my intention, but there's been some interesting conversations. I really need to add more content to the website. I haven't updated it for ages, and now I'm getting to the point with my thesis research that I probably have some interesting ideas to write about, so I need to do a little bit more of work on that. So if we flick onto the next slide, is this an okay pace? Am I racing through this, or is it okay? Yeah, all good? Okay, I can only see Emma, so she's my barometer. So for my master's, I knew I wanted to keep up the momentum of the research I was doing. And, I'm not going to lie, I'd found quite an under-researched area. Not many people are talking about gender in play. Very little research, no New Zealand research into it. And so I thought, shit, I really want to get going on this. I don't want any other researchers to go, oh, that's really interesting, and start researching the stuff that I've kind of carving out my little niche in. So I decided to really crack on with my master's. People thought I was mad. Yeah, and it is really hard, but so they might be right. I had this big toss up between my master's and my doctorate, and I really, really, really wish I was doing my doctorate. I decided to do my master's because I did an honours degree. I could do my thesis, and I wouldn't have to do any other work for my master's. I could just do my year-long thesis, and I thought that that was actually something which was reasonable and sustainable, given that my children have literally had me studying and being really busy since they were 14 months old. I thought it wasn't really fair to take on another 3 to 5 year research project. So yeah, I'm doing my master's. It's quite hard because I've designed a really big piece of research, and I don't know how I'm going to jam it in to 40,000 words, but we'll do our best. So what I'm looking at is, for my master's, is skate parks as an example of assets that we build as the council, which are really expensive. Like, skate parks cost quite a few $100,000 to design and build, but which are only really being used by boys. And that really bothers me, that we know that that's the case. Even before I did research, we knew that that was the case. Anybody who's gone past a skate park can see that. But nobody seems to have ever said, hey, is that really fair or right that we should keep investing in recreational facilities that girls don't really seem to use? That kind of bothers me from an equity perspective. So I was quite keen to try and put some attention on that. It's been slightly controversial with some people within the wider council family, but that's fine. My manager supports me, and that's all that counts. So what I'm really looking at is, what are the barriers and enablers that affect girls' use of skate parks? Is there anything we could do differently about how we run them, how we design them? Like, is there any way we could make skate parks more appealing to the girls who want to use them? So I'm using as my case study this awesome female coached girls only skateboarding class called Girls Skate NZ, which is run by this awesome woman called Amber Clyde. She's very cool, and she basically just doesn't give a stuff. So she's like, you know what, I'm going to teach girls how to skate because I'm sick of having hassles from guys when I've been learning to skate when I was younger. And she doesn't go and do it at a school necessarily or anything like that. She just runs the classes at the skate parks. She just rocks up, takes the skate park over. She'll have 25 girls turn up and she'll just take over the space while she teaches them. She's actually a really amazing coach. Like if any of you have daughters, or even actually she's running classes for over 18s now as well. I think at 45, I'd be at too much of a risk of breaking a hip. But people younger than me should go for it because she's doing over 18s classes. And she's a really good teacher. She gets these kids to a point very early on where they can do quite cool things like drop into a bowl and stuff like that. She's good at nurturing people. She's a good teacher, good coach. So what I'm planning to do for my study is it's a qualitative and quantitative study. So the quantitative side of things has been really further establishing that gender balance of skate park use. So I've been doing that over the summer. I'm pretty much finished with that now. And it's been pretty clear. In this study I've done, 92% of skateboarders are male. Skate park users is a slightly broader term because there's also lots of kids on scooters, but even if you take that into account, it's over 90% male use at skate parks. And then the qualitative side of things, which is slightly ground to a halt at the moment because I can't go anywhere or see anybody, but it's a 3-strand approach. So one has been talking to people that my ethics approval calls key informants, which is adult skateboarders. I've talked to 3 male and 3 female skateboarders about their experiences and their kind of perceptions of skateboarding and boys and girls skateboarding. I'm also planning to run some focus group sessions with some of the girls that Amber teaches and also have some telephone interviews with their parents. And the reason I'm doing that, I really want to hear from the girls about what do they enjoy about skateboarding, what have their experiences been like, why do they do it, all that good stuff. But also I want to hear from their parents because some of these parents are driving their kids from Howick to Birkenhead to do this class. And there would be closer places these girls could go to skate. So I'm really keen to try and get an idea of why in particular have they chosen these girls only classes. And also, do they let their girls go to local skate parks when the classes aren't on? Because that's the bit I'm really interested in finding out. So it's great that these girls have their passion for skateboarding and they go and they skate with Amber at her class. But do they skate any other times? Because my quantitative study would suggest that they don't. Well, if they do, they're not at the skate parks that I've been going to. So that's the question I'm really interested to find out. My thesis is due to be submitted in late November. Hopefully that's still doable. I might be doing some Skype interviews, I suspect, to try and keep my research going. But I've done some really good, interesting literature reviews and stuff so far, which I need to write up. And the really interesting thing, so there's 3 adult female skateboarders I've spoken to. All of them have described skate parks as really intimidating spaces. And these aren't beginners, these are really good skateboarders. And even they say, no, I don't, those are intimidating spaces. So if they find it intimidating, you can understand why like a 10 or 11-year-old girl may not necessarily feel like they want to use the spaces. Interestingly, the 3 guys I've spoken to, none of them can understand that. They all are very clear. They're like, we'd love girls to come and skate. We'd love women to skate. It'd be fine. I don't know what the problem is. There's no barrier, but they don't understand that if you are in the absolute minority going into an environment which is full of people who are not exactly like you, plus skateboarding does have this culture of a lot of sitting around and watching other people do it, that's quite an intimidating environment, and the men don't seem to get that. It's also pretty clear from the research I've been doing that some really strong social drivers which influence girls being active in general, and also with really male-dominated things like skateboarding. So, at puberty, for example, it's a real flashpoint for girls becoming less active, and it's often around, being conscious of their bodies changing. There's this objectification theory, which is this whole idea that women, and I think it's completely true, women are very conscious of always being observed. As evidenced by the effort most of us take in how we appear, because we know people are going to be looking at us and judging us. And I think for girls in puberty in particular, that's a real flashpoint for that. You're very acutely self-conscious. So you don't want to be trying a new activity you might not be good at. You don't want to be doing that in front of a crowd of boys necessarily. And incidentally, if you have daughters and you want them to stay physically active, single-sex schools can be something to think about, because girls at single-sex schools are a lot more active than girls at co-ed schools, according to the research that I've been reading. So yeah, that's something to think about. I think the other thing is that the girls who do participate in skateboarding, it is a really good activity for self-determination theory. That's probably one of my kind of underlying theoretical frameworks for my thesis is the idea that skateboarding is actually a really good activity to encourage girls towards, because it fulfills those components of it's something you do autonomously, it's something you do with other people, and it's something that you do to become competent. So yeah, I'm trying to get my daughter onto a skate park, but now of course they're all shut and we can't go anywhere, but she was just on the verge of giving it a go, which is a shame. So yeah, so my thesis is a continuing story, which hopefully will get finished this year. If we flick onto the next slide, when I started doing my thesis, I was chatting to the activations manager, a guy called Pete Cachopoli at work, because I wanted to talk to some skate park custodians, who are people that the council pays to be present at certain skate parks. Initially, that was to stop them being vandalised, but actually now it's turned into more of a kind of a supervisory role, which enables young people to use the skate parks knowing that they're safe and there's not going to be drug dealing or anything going on. And so we had this great conversation, Pete and me, and we realised we were quite well aligned. And then about 2 weeks later, he sent me an email with details of a vacancy in his team, which might have been just a great coincidence, but it had been, the role had been vacant for about a year, or just under a year. At this point, I'd been working at the council for about 14 months. So since the final semester of my undergraduate degree, I was doing a very strategic parks planning role, which was not setting my world alight. But it was good. I got to know about local boards, and I got to do lots of mana whenua engagement and lots of really useful and interesting stuff. But the actual work wasn't so great. So anyway, long story short, I got this job with Pete, and what it involves, he has some activation advisors who work for him who do geographically specific projects. So the out and about Auckland work is in our team. So when you see free events being put on by local boards in parks, it's usually our team who do it. But my role is a regional role focusing on young people, trying to encourage tamariki and rangatahi to be more active. We've got some specific target populations, so Māori and Pacifica youth, Asian youth, and girls. So how great for me, I can pretty much, use my ideas and put them into action. Pete and I have I've been in this role since October, and Pete and I have spent a lot of time talking and thinking about how we want to approach it. And we're really keen to try and shift the focus away from sport and towards play and recreation. So just rewinding a little bit, just as I finished my dissertation in late 2018, the government announced their focus on women and girls, sport, play and active rec, which was amazing, like exactly where I was focusing. That was suddenly the big focus for the sector. But what is continuing to happen is that a lot of that focus seems to be primarily on sport. And even when people like Sport New Zealand talk about play and active rec, it tends to be talked about in the context of play is really good because it helps kids get ready to play sport, or active rec is really good because it keeps you fit to play sport. And I'm really keen to shift that narrative, because I think it's pretty clear that a lot of kids don't want to play organised sport, and that's fine. There's no shortages of opportunities to play sport if you're a young person in New Zealand. Some kids definitely have some material disadvantages, so like their parents can't afford the fees or the equipment, but by and large, most kids can access a team sport if they wanted to play it. We've got lots of facilities, and we've got lots of clubs and lots of school teams. But our statistics around young people being inactive are getting worse and worse and worse. And so that suggests to me that those opportunities are not actually of interest to young people, and we need to be a bit more creative. So what Pete and I are trying to do is to really make it much more about the idea that everybody can play, and teenagers may not call it play, they might just call it mucking around with their friends. But the important things are having fun, having a good time, and being with people you like, whether that's your friends or your family or both. And we really want to make that the basis of the projects that come out under my roles. So we might organise a fun run, but it will literally be a walk or run, and it's going to be glow in the dark, and it's all about it just being fun, because I really feel strongly that if we make things enjoyable, they're much more likely to stay a part of somebody's life. Things like beep tests at intermediate are literally, if you want to make people hate being active, that's exactly the way to do it, is to make kids do that. And we do it all the time. I mean, my kids' primary school, I was so annoyed. My kids' primary school emailed us all a few weeks ago to say that they were doing netball trials for year 3 and year 4 girls. So year 3 girls are 8 years old. So I emailed back the principal and said, okay, so my daughter will be 8 next year. She hasn't wanted to play netball. If she wanted to play next year, her first introduction to that is having to participate in a trial. Like, who is running the trial? My husband works in elite sport, and I told him this, and he was like, running a trial is an incredibly technical thing, and you can guarantee that the sports coordinator at a primary school has no idea how to do that. It is ridiculous, and it's completely against all of the guidance being put out about sport. but it just epitomises this focus we have on being competitive rather than kids just actually participating and having fun. It really winds me up. That's a work in progress to address that. But yeah, so what I'm doing in my role is I'm using my research to council is all about evidence-based solutions, so that's perfect because my research completely aligns with my work, which is awesome. All I do all the time is think about children and young people and playing and being active. And as I say, we're trying to shift that focus. And the other thing, the broader thing that Pete and I have really talked about is that we really want to use this role as a way of asserting the right of young people to actually enjoy their city. Like, young people aren't citizens in waiting, they are actually citizens, and they have the right to live in a place which actually caters to their needs. So if we know that kids like long grass at parks so they can roll around in it and make huts, why the hell are we mowing everything all the time? Like, if we know kids like climbing trees, why are we pruning all the trees so you can't climb them? You know, we're not thinking of anything from a children's perspective. And I know that Alex Bonham, if she's in this call, will be nodding along because she's doing her doctorate about the playful city, and she and I have had a lot of chats about this. Like, we should be able to make a city that works for adults and for younger people, and we're really bad at it. I think one of the problems is at the moment the council does not have any strong strategic objective to focus on the needs of young people, because the primary need of children, you go to school and you play. Those are your jobs as a kid. So if we're not providing good opportunities for that, we're kind of letting our young people down. But anyway, I could go for days on that. So let's go on to the next slide. So at the moment, of course, it's really difficult to deliver projects and initiatives when nobody's allowed to go anywhere and all of our facilities are shut. So last week, Pete and I, on Monday afternoon, had some big conversations about what can we do? Can we do anything? Can we do anything to kind of socialise our ideas about play being something that's for everybody? Pete had bought a licence last year for this app called Goose Chase, which basically enables you to design online scavenger hunts. And you could be looking for stuff, or you could be collecting experiences. So you load in, if you're the administrator, you load in missions and you assign them a points value. I mean, for us, that's a reasonably, you know, kind of academic thing because we're not really going by points. But you load in a mission, and then people join your game with their team, and then they complete the mission and they get the points, and they go up in the rankings and they can challenge their friends. So we were like, this is the perfect opportunity to actually use this. So in 2 days last week, we developed this whole game. I wrote loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of missions. We uploaded it on Thursday, the first day of the lockdown, and it's called We Got This Lockdown Challenge. I'll share the details. I've shared them on the group already, but I'll share them again. It's getting a lot of attention. A lot of people are playing it, which is cool, and people are really reporting back that it's proven to be a bit of a godsend. So I'm basically writing kind of activities lists for all the families in New Zealand, because we've opened it up to everybody in New Zealand. It's an Auckland Council funded thing, but it's free for users, and we were like, God, share it with everybody, you know, anybody can use it. So we're uploading it with like 4 or 5 new missions every day, so it's got fresh content, and we're trying to include a lot of active stuff, but also other stuff, silly stuff, creative stuff, a real variety to appeal to lots of different people. Everything that we're loading into it is completely aligned with the COVID-19 guidelines, so it's all stuff that you can do from home or that you can do when you're out for your daily walk. We did have some intentions to include some stuff which would involve going to your local park if you had one within walking distance, but I've been really reluctant to put those up because I think there's some really differing and quite strong views around whether that's appropriate, whether people should be going to parks. I mean, you can see this is my backyard, this graphic. The terrible side on the left, not the lovely side on the right. That's our neighbours. They're good gardeners and we're bad. So we've got a park at the bottom of our garden and our kids run around on that, but we don't have to drive anywhere to get to anywhere, and we can stay away from people. So we've left out the park things for now because I strongly suspect that there will be tighter lockdowns coming about congregating, and I think parks and beaches may get shut as spaces to go. So for now we're keeping that out. Also, I just didn't want the argument with people about it because life's too hard anyway. So what we're trying to do with this game is we're trying to make it really fun. We're trying to give people things to do, but we're also hopefully socialising this idea that actually playgrounds are awesome and sports facilities are fantastic, but you don't need them to be active. Like, you can, it's actually more of a state of mind, choosing to be playful and have fun and be active. It doesn't require going to a playground. And this is a really important thing for parents, I think, because what we see in council is parents very much, not all parents, but a lot of parents very much associate play with playgrounds. So we need more play in our neighbourhood. It kind of translates to, please build us another playground. And there is no doubt there are massive issues around this within council. So we have real inequity across the city. So the north has a ridiculous number of playgrounds. The average age is like 102 on the North Shore, but we have so many playgrounds. And down south, where there is much younger population, the playgrounds are terrible and there's not very many of them. So one of the things that I'm trying to challenge within council is the idea that we need a regional play equity fund, because at the moment playground funding comes via local boards, and local boards decide what to spend their money on. Local boards in some parts of the city have a lot of problems that they need to try and address, so therefore they have less money for cool things like playgrounds. In other areas, local boards have less to spend money on, so they can put more money into playgrounds, but that means the problem will never get solved in the areas that are lacking. So yeah, I've been pushing quite hard that we need to set up some kind of regional play equity fund, perhaps with some corporate philanthropy behind it to help fund it, and that local boards could maybe apply to it to get additional funding specifically for play. That's something, I've got a corporate social responsibility background, and I used to be a corporate community investment person for a corporate, so I'm hoping to draw on a bit of that experience. But yeah, if we flick onto the next slide, this is what I see as the opportunities in my role. So one of the things, I had a chat with the head of PSR, Park Sport and Rec, Mace Ward, recently, about the fact that the government announced that focus on women's and girls sport, play and recreation, but Auckland Council offered no strategic response to that. We don't have a strategy that addresses that. And that seems to me a real problem when we know that so many of our facilities for sport and recreation are completely male dominated. I feel like we need to actually be talking about this a bit more. As I've said, tracking that disproportionate investment, because I reckon if we break it down both in the amount of space that male-dominated sport and rec takes up and how much money we spend, it would actually be scary. One thing I'm also really keen to do, and I've been talking to the head of REMU, which is Auckland Council's research arm, is when you start having these conversations about why do we not provide more for girls, people say, well, what do girls want to do? And I say, well, we have no idea because you've never bothered to ask them. So I'd really like to see us get a lot better at capturing girls' aspirations and interests. Also, I'm very keen to make young people a much more priority in our asset planning, and just make play like a universal goal for everybody. Nobody should be too old to play. We should have play on the way in all of our streets. We should have swings in our trees. One of the things we were working on before the lockdown was doing a map of really cool trees to climb in Albert Park in the Domain. Another thing I was just about in the verge of looking at was developing play trails within our regional parks. So people who take their kids to regional parks, it will actually be a bit more fun for the kids. There'll be actual stuff aimed at them. Yeah, so that's a real gallop through the stuff that I do all day. I think that's my last slide. So if anybody has